So we'll quickly look at the female ones now as well. So we'll just start with the female in general, and then we'll get into the more complex look at the ovarian cycle and the menstrual cycle and how those particular hormones are regulated. So just like with the male, we start back in the brain. So we have the hypothalamus. Now remember, just to revise, the hypothalamus releases the gonadotropin releasing hormone. That sends that message down to the anterior pituitary gland and there, and it also releases the follicle stimulating hormone and the luteinizing hormone, just like the males, because females and males both produce follicles. Just in the female, we're looking this time at the egg. So there's a little egg cell there. Yep. So we'll look now, so we'll fast forward because we've already talked about how the hormones actually travel through and target the specific cells that they need to produce those. So we'll just fast forward right down now to the ovaries itself. So before we looked at a little picture of the ovaries, so that's what's going on in there. Awesome. Fascinating, wasn't it? And basically we're looking at the hormones produced there. So estrogen, so that the estrogen actually helps with the growth or the regrowth of the endometrial tissue inside the uterus, which is in there. And look, there's a little fetus in there. Yay! So you can see that. Oopsie. You can see that part in there. So that actually has the estrogen builds up the walls inside the uterus. It also interacts with or helps with ovulation. This is the estrogen, by the way. And one important factor that is, it should be noted that estrogen's really, really important in females, especially for calcium absorption. So later on when we look at menopause, we'll see why there's so many issues with osteoporosis and females when they don't have that estrogen sort of being produced anymore or as much. So they also look at the prostate, oops, wrong body, the pituitary gland also regulates and initiates progesterone. That again works with the regrowth of the endometrial tissue inside the uterus, and it regulates the menstrual cycle as well. We've also got with the progesterone too. Progesterone also inhibits, that's really important that you remember this one. Progesterone also inhibits the follicle stimulating hormone. Okay, so that's really important because if progesterone is released when pregnancy occurs, so if that's happening in here, okay, and we actually have a fertilized egg and it's actually started to implant, okay, we don't want the follicle stimulating hormone to continue. We don't want any more follicles. We don't want the ovaries to release any more eggs because we already have a fertilized egg inside the uterus. So part of the role of progesterone is to inhibit the follicle stimulating hormone in pregnancy and also to inhibit the luteinizing hormone. The luteinizing hormone, one of its roles is to help with the degradation of the uterine wall during the menstrual cycle. So if we have a fertilization occur, we kind of need that tissue there for it to implant. So progesterone will inhibit that. So just like in the male, they have inhibin, we have the progesterone that does that in the females. And that will just allow the pregnancy to be maintained, hopefully. So in females, the follicle stimulating hormone basically stimulates the development of the eggs down here in the ovary. Okay, right there. And that's called the ova. And they develop in structures called follicles. So it's follicle stimulating. The follicle cells produce that inhibin hormone that inhibits the FSH production. Once one of the follicles have been released, that is, because we don't want another one coming out at the same time. The body, if it already has one that's been fertilized, we don't want another one coming out there. So that will be basically inhibited, and we know that progesterone has a role to play in that one. So that FSH production will be inhibited. And then the luteinizing hormone, LH, that will then play a role in the development of the ovary as well. It will induce ovulation, so it'll allow that to come out, and stimulates estradiol and progesterone production in the ovaries. Yeah, so they're the main ones that you need to know. So we know that progesterone plays a big part in regulating the menstrual cycle as well, because obviously if a pregnancy occurs, we need to mix up and change the amounts of hormones that are actually being released. So looking at the two cycles, we've got the ovarian cycle and we've got the menstrual cycle. So if you look at the ovarian cycle, and that's going to happen, and think of the name, in the ovaries, ovarian ovaries. So the ovarian cycle basically is preparing the tissues inside the endocrine glands that are inside of there, the endocrine tissue, to release eggs to become fertilized. So that's the role of the ovarian cycle. Prepare and release the egg from the ovarian. Yep. The menstrual cycle, on the other hand, which will be occurring here, looks at the preparation, getting the lining of the uterus prepared, and then maintaining that preparation. And then when fertilization does not occur, it gets rid of it. Okay, so the cycles occur concurrently, so at the same time. Sorry, not at the same time. They're all the time. So you've got one going and you've got the other one going as well. So they're coordinated over 22 to 30 days worth of cycle. The cycle itself, the whole cycle itself put together, is about 28 days. But that can vary in different people. The first half of the ovarian cycle is that follicular phase. So that's when you'll get that rise of those hormones being released. So the hypothalamus will pick up that message, send it to the pituitary gland, the anterior pituitary, and that will initiate an increase in the level of follicle stimulating hormone and also the luteinizing hormone. So that'll allow the follicles onto basically the surface of the ovary. So that will prepare the egg and get it ready for ovulation. So get it ready to leave the ovary and go into the fallopian tube. Once the follicles start to grow, they release these estrogens and a little bit of progesterone. Okay, a little bit of progesterone, because the reason we only have a bit of that is just in case fertilization doesn't occur. All right, there is some progesterone because if fertilization does occur, we need to make sure that the endometrium here in the uterus actually is maintained, because that's, where the baby is going to eventually grow and get its nutrients. So through the fallopian tubes, so I think I may have actually not attached the fallopian tubes, whoops-a-daisies. Just pretend that red thing there, which we're just going to pretend that's the fallopian tube for now, because I just didn't have time to attach it. So for this, let's make that the fallopian tube, whatever. So that actually takes the egg or the ovum about 7 days to travel its entire length, and at that stage it's called the morula. And there's about 30 to 60 cells there. If the pregnancy, by the time it gets to there, by the way, it's not 30 to 60 cells in there. We're talking about in there when it gets there. So about 30 to 60 cells. And if pregnancy implantation does not occur, the lining then just comes off. After about 5 days, the estrogen levels rise, and then the menstrual cycle begins, and that's in the proliferative phase, where the endometrium begins to regrow. So once that's actually been shed and gotten rid of, it then needs to start rebuilding again straight away, ready for the next egg or ovum to actually come down there. So the endometrium will start to regrow, new blood vessels will start to form, and any of the glands that may have deteriorated during the end of the last cycle also start to reform. So this is happening all the time, and it's all being regulated via the hypothalamus up there. Okay, so it's happening all the time. In about the middle of the cycle, so about day 14, there's a high level of estrogen. that's going to spike the follicle stimulating hormone and the luteinizing hormone to rise quite rapidly. So that's right in the middle. So we're looking at, that's around the ovulatory stage. Okay, that rise in luteinizing hormone causes ovulation. So it causes the egg, basically the ovum, to be released from the ovary, yeah, and it then enters into the fallopian tube. So that's ovulation, yeah. The most mature follicle, so the one that's actually mature the most by this time, will be the one that is actually released. So there'll be a rupture in the ovary wall and the egg will be released. Any of the follicles that did not rupture, they'll just degenerate and those eggs will be lost. At that point, the level of estrogen will decrease, yeah, when the extra follicles degenerate. So they won't need it at that point in time. After ovulation, the ovarian cycle then goes into its luteal phase, and then the menstrual cycle will go into a secretory phase. So that goes from about days 15 to 28, and the luteal and secretory phase basically changes that are occurring in the ruptured follicle. And the cells within that follicle, and that's why I'm holding this right here, because this is where it's all going on in that part right there. They undergo all these like physical changes. They also develop a structure which, you know, you kind of need to know about, and that's called the corpus luteum. So what the corpus luteum actually does is it produces estrogen and it produces progesterone. Okay, when that's occurring, so we'll look at the progesterone first. You have this regrowth of the uterine lining. When that's happening, so uterine lining in here, and when that's actually happening, and it inhibits basically the release of any more of that follicle stimulating hormone, yeah, and the luteinizing hormone. So what's happening is the uterus is being prepared to accept the egg if it has been fertilized in this particular cycle. So when the inhibition of follicle stimulating and luteinizing hormone has occurred, it then prevents any further eggs and any further follicles forming or developing while that progesterone level is increased or elevated. So remember that progesterone is really important for pregnancy. Then after that, the sort of estrogen that's produced by the corpus luteum, back down here, it basically increases steadily for a couple of days. If this little fella in here, okay, so if that does not implant into the uterus, the corpus luteum just degenerates. It just degenerates. It's not actually needed anymore for this particular cycle, and that affects the hormone levels again because the estrogen and the progesterone levels decrease. When that's happening, when those particular hormones are decreasing, the endometrium will then also degenerate. The progesterone levels will drop because there's no pregnancy. You only need that there. And then that will initiate the next menstrual cycle. So once there's been a decrease in progesterone, the hypothalamus, we go back to our brain again. So let's go back here. Remember, this is our big control center right here. So if we look right back at the hypothalamus, basically what that's doing, that's sending the GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone, to the anterior pituitary again. That releases more FSH and LH, and it starts these cycles all over again. Okay, so we're going through those, or females are going through those cycles continuously.